Hello everybody, now today I will be reviewing the Canon EF S 18-135mm lens. Now this is a very common lens. It's one of the two standard kit lenses you get to choose from. It's the more premium expensive option. So today I will be reviewing this and see how good it really is. So right now I have in my hands the STM version. Now it's practically the same as the micromotor version. So this review applies to the micromotor version of the 18-135mm lens as well. But then there are a few very minor differences here and there. So I will point those differences out as we go along. So let's begin with the exterior build. So this lens is a relatively light lens. It feels very light on the EOS 70D. It doesn't look very big either. So this thing is about 480 grams. So it is very light compared to my other lenses. So it's medium sized, and then it's not too bulky but not too compact either. So it's somewhere in the middle. It takes 67mm filters and it has a metal mount. This lens is made in Taiwan, not like Canon's more expensive lenses that are made in Japan. This lens has image stabilization and it goes all the way from 18mm to 135mm. But then you can see the barrel actually extends quite a fair bit when you zoom in. You have this huge rubber zoom ring right here. The zoom ring is very big and it has a very small focus ring. Not very small, just relatively smaller. The zoom ring is nice and rubberized, but the focus ring is plastic. So the zooming on the 18-135 feels fairly smooth when you just do it casually, but at close inspection you can find that it's actually nowhere near as smooth as the zoom ring of any L lens. So especially when you're trying to make fine zoom adjustments, you can feel that it's actually not that well dampened at all. Nowhere near as well smoothened and dampened as L lenses. Now the focus ring on the other hand is very smooth. It feels very light, kind of dampened. However, it feels sort of too light. It has a very minimal resistance to it. So you can turn it by accident quite easily, but then the STM version of this lens, this does not apply to the micromotor version of this lens, but for STM lenses, the motor is focused by wire, so that means you are not actually physically turning the focus of the lens. You are just turning it this way so that you're sending a signal into some processor inside the lens or the body, and then it relays that data into the lens motor, and then the motor sort of mimics your movement. So although I'm turning it by hand in manual focus, it is still driven by the motor. So basically you cannot shift manual focus when you are you have the body powered off or you have the lens detached. So the focus is internal, so it is an internal focus lens, and you cannot move the focus at all without attaching it to a powered body. Not a big issue, but it could cause problems if you're trying to use this lens with, for example, extension tubes or third-party adapters. Now, an additional thing I can notice on the 18-135 STM version is that it has a zoom lock switch. So it is only operable when your lens is in the 18mm position, and once it's switched to lock, your zoom is locked. Now you cannot use it at any other focal length, you can only use it at the 18mm end. So basically this is to lock your lens from zooming to prevent zoom creep, but however, I find that this lens doesn't actually suffer from any zoom creep at all. Even if I try to shake it like so, no. This lens is completely free from any zoom creep, so I don't know why you need the lock switch there, but then it's there. Alright, image quality. The image quality of this lens, basically, it's not very sharp throughout the entire zoom range. Now, compared to the 18-55, the 18-135 may be slightly sharper at the edges, but still it is quite soft at the edges as well. And one noticeable thing you can notice of the 18-135 compared to the 18-55, the cheaper one, is that the 18-135 actually has a whole lot more chromatic aberration around the edges. And chromatic aberration is one thing I've noticed with this lens Because at 18mm, you get a whole lot of chromatic aberration at the edges. And the thing is, it doesn't go away even when you stop it down, even till f8. The chromatic aberration is still there. Now, there is quite a bit of barrel distortion at 18mm, and when you zoom it in to 135mm, you get quite a bit of pincushion distortion. Now, AF with the STM version of the lens, now the micromotor version has a slightly slower AF, but the STM AF is actually quite quick. It snaps into focus when you're shifting focus between subjects, so it's very quick, fairly reliable, and it's like I said, it's all internal focusing, so when you are focusing, the physical length of the lens does not change. So focus breathing is quite minimal on this lens, not too much. And it's very, very silent. In fact, you can barely hear the sound it makes because the STM motor is just so silent. You have to listen very, very closely to hear the noise made by the motor. So this lens is a f3.5 to 5.6. That means when you zoom in, it goes from the maximum aperture goes from a f3.5 at the 18mm to a f5.6 at the 135mm end. So you lose a lot of light as you zoom in. So it's not very good for video because when you zoom in when you're recording video, your video goes dark. And then because of the very small maximum aperture at the longer focal lengths, this makes this lens almost unusable in low light. Now it is possible to get bokeh with this lens, but then you will have to zoom in quite a bit. You have to use it at the longer focal length ranges. But the bokeh is fair enough, especially at 135mm. You can get decent bokeh out of this lens, but don't expect amazing bokeh out of this because it is a f5.6. But then this can still be used as a portrait lens if you absolutely have to. But then if you're looking into serious portrait photography, I think it would be better to invest on some prime lenses like the 135mm f2L lens or a 85mm. Now I like to talk a bit about the manual focus of this lens. Now the manual focus of this lens is very fidgety. Now this is not the case with the micromotor version because you get physical manual focus, but then with this, the focus by wire, the manual focus can be quite confusing. Now because the STM is focused by wire, you don't really have any physical control over the focus. So the manual focus on this is actually not that responsive, and the length of the focus throw is also not constant. So for example, when I turn the focus ring of this lens very quickly in minor focus, it shifts the focal plane at a huge rate when I'm turning it quickly. But then when I do it slowly, it then shifts the focus plane at a ridiculously low rate, which makes it rather hard for me to use in minor focus. So if you're doing video and you're using manual focus, this is a huge drawback in my honest opinion. Now, this lens has sort of the Canon calls it FTM, full-time manual override. That means even in AF mode, you can manually override the lens's focus. Now, not like USM lenses, you can just grab the focus ring and turn it. No, for this, to override the focus, you first have to pre-focus, and then once it has a quiet focus, then you can override it with the focus button half pressed. If not, it wouldn't work. So this is quite confusing. Because turning the focus ring in AF mode would not have any effect on the focus. You would have to focus it first, keep the shutter button half pressed, and then you can override the focus. So this lens costs about 550 US bucks. That's not very cheap for a kit lens. So to me, this lens is actually not worth the money because there's simply no wow factor to this lens. Now the only advantage I could think of for this lens is the decent range of focal length, but then if you really need a super zoom, you could just go with a 18 to 200. Now for this lens, it's expensive and it's really not that good. So everything of this lens is basically from below average to just good enough. Now the build quality is amazing, the image quality is not that good, the aperture darkens when you zoom in, the maximum aperture is not very bright at all, so it is quite a boring lens if you ask me. So this lens is basically just somewhere in the middle. It's not too bad. In terms of build quality, it doesn't feel too cheap. It doesn't feel like a ultimate cheap lens like the 50mm 1.8, which is actually quite a good performer. But or it doesn't really feel as cheap and as plasticky and as wobbly as the 18 to 55. So this lens may be good enough for those who just want to take casual photos and want a fairly good zoom range. For example, if you're going traveling and you just want a few family pictures, then this lens could serve you fine. But then if you're doing serious photography, and if you're a serious photographer and you're going to need a lens for work, for example, you need a workhorse standard zoom, then I really recommend investing on a better lens than this. So that is pretty much I have to say about this lens. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see